Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some technologies feel easy to use and understand while others leave you scratching your head? It turns out it is not just about how complex the tech is, but how much we feel like we get it. Today, we're diving into some fascinating research about technology transparency. Basically, how well we understand what a machine is doing and why. Think about your smartphone, your smart speaker, or even your car. Do you really know what is going on under the hood? Scientists have developed new tools called the TechTra Scales to measure two really important things: how much transparency people need from a technology and how much transparency they actually perceive. They found it is crucial to look at both needs and what people actually see. And these new scales can help us do just that. In our increasingly digital world, understanding technology is becoming super important. It is not just about using it, but about using it wisely and responsibly. Imagine a smart oven that suddenly turns off. Was it a safety feature, a glitch? Knowing this makes a huge difference in how we trust and use these devices. Technology transparency is all about giving users the information they want about what a technology is doing, how it works, and why. Now, some might think more transparency is always better, like more information is always good. But this research suggests it is more complicated. Too much information can be overwhelming. Too little can lead to confusion or even mistrust. It is like Goldilocks, we need just the right amount. And what is just right can be different for everyone and for every technology. That is why measuring people's actual needs for transparency and their perceptions of it is so important. Until now, we've been a bit stuck because there haven't been great tools to measure these two things separately and compare them effectively. So, what did our researchers do? They ran 3 studies to build and test their new measuring tools, which they call the TechTra Scales. The goal was to create scales that are easy to use, cover a lot of important aspects of transparency, and can be used for pretty much any technology. In study 1, they generated a bunch of potential questions. In study 2, they got feedback from people who work in user experience and usability, the pros who design and test these things every day. And in study 3, they put the scales to the test in a real-world scenario with a robot. To start, they looked at what existing research said are the key things people might want to know about a technology. They identified aspects like how it works, why it does something, how to use it, its performance, what data it uses, what it is currently doing, error details, its usefulness, and its trustworthiness. For each of these, they wrote 2 questions. Crucially, they made sure the questions were worded so they could be used for measuring either what people perceive about a technology's transparency or what they need from it. They used a 1 to -7 scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree to get detailed answers. In the first big study, they had 191 people answer questions about their experiences with 3 different technologies: a washing machine, the social media platform YouTube, and an AI chatbot like ChatGPT. They wanted to see if their questions worked across different types of tech. They analyzed the answers to see which questions were the strongest and measured what they intended. The results were promising. People found the term technology transparency easy to understand. The questions generally showed good reliability, meaning they were consistent. They looked at things like how well each question related to the overall score for that scale, and which questions might be measuring slightly different things. Based on all this data, they whittled down the questions to the best ones. They ended up with 10 questions for each scale: TechTra P for perception and TechTra N for need. For example, for perception, one question might be, it seems transparent to me. How the technological product works for need. It would be, it should be transparent to me how the technological product works. They kept questions that covered the different aspects they identified, aiming for a concise but comprehensive set. They deliberately left out questions about error details because they were seen as less clear or only relevant when an error actually happens. This first study also started looking at validity. They checked if their new scales related to other existing measures of transparency and related concepts. They found that their need scale correlated with other measures of needing explanations, and their perception scale correlated with general perceptions of transparency. Importantly, their perception and need scales didn't correlate with each other much at all. This is a huge finding. It strongly suggests that what people perceive about transparency is different from what they need, and we need to measure both. They also saw that people generally perceived the AI chatbot as less transparent than their washing machine. But their need for transparency was higher for the AI. This shows how context matters. Next, they brought in 23 UX and usability professionals. These are the people who design and build technology. They wanted to know if these experts thought the TechTra Scales were useful and easy to use in their work. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The professionals found the scales applicable for investigating user needs and perceptions. They thought the scales were easy to use and could give them insights into why users felt a certain way. They also said they would be willing to use these scales in their jobs. They did offer some constructive criticism. A key point was that while the scales are good, they might not give super deep insights into why users answered the way they did. As the questions are quite direct, they also noted that the relevance of certain questions might depend heavily on the specific product. For example, questions about how an AI works might be less important for a simple website. Another interesting comment was that trustworthiness might be more of a result of transparency rather than an aspect of it. Based on this feedback, the researchers made a couple of smart adjustments. They added fields for open-ended responses to the scales, allowing users to explain their ratings and specify what exactly they wanted to know or didn't want to know about the technology. This addresses the need for deeper insights. They also tweaked the instructions to make the goal of each scale even clearer. The final study was the most exciting. They brought 73 people into a lab and had them interact with a physical robot, Pepper. They set up a Wizard of Oz scenario where participants thought they were talking to the robot, but a hidden human was actually controlling its responses. They did this to create a controlled experiment where they could manipulate the transparency. They had two conditions. In one, Pepper would perform tasks like estimating a participant's age or recognizing a plant, but without any explanation. In the other condition, Pepper would explain how it was doing those things. For example, it might say, "I am looking at your facial features to estimate your age." And here is what they found for RQ1. The hypothesis was that explaining the robot's actions would increase perceived transparency. And it did. People in the explanation group rated the robot's transparency much higher on the TechTra P scale than those in the no explanation group. This shows that TechTra P is sensitive to actual design changes. It works in a real interaction. Participants' qualitative comments really back this up, with one saying they couldn't understand how the robot got its results without an explanation. Now, for RQ2, they looked at the need scale, TechTra N. Interestingly, the robot's design, whether it explained its actions or not, didn't change how much transparency people needed. This supports the idea that need is more fundamental and less dependent on the immediate design, at least in this experiment. What they did find from the individual items was that people really wanted to know if they could trust the robot and what personal data it was using. They were less concerned about knowing the exact mechanics of how the robot worked or what it would do next. This is super insightful about what is becoming important for people. For RQ3, they checked how their TechTra scales related to other psychological constructs. Again, transparency perception and need didn't correlate much with each other, reinforcing their separation TechTra. P showed strong links to things like explainability and predictability from another robot transparency scale, and also to the pragmatic quality of a system, basically how useful and efficient it is. This suggests transparency is closely tied to how well a technology functions for us. On the other hand, TechTra N had some links to things like attractiveness and pragmatic quality, but generally showed weaker correlations than TechTra P across the board. The fact that individual differences like technology self-efficacy didn't strongly influence the scales also pointed to transparency, needs being very context-specific. So, what is the big takeaway from all this? The researchers successfully developed the TechTra Scales, which are a flexible and comprehensive tool for understanding technology transparency. They prove that it is vital to differentiate between what users need and what they perceive regarding transparency. This is where the real so what comes in. The TechTra Scales allow for what they call target performance comparisons. This means you can use TechTra and to figure out what transparency users want before you design something, and then use TechTra Scale to see if your design actually meets those needs. The study showed that transparency needs aren't always high. They change based on the technology and the situation. For example, complex AI systems spark more need than a simple washing machine. By comparing the need scores to the perception scores, designers can pinpoint exactly where a technology is falling short or even being too transparent. The validity of the TechTra Scales is well supported. They work across different technologies, from simple to complex. They are sensitive to design changes, as seen in the robot study, and they capture distinct aspects of transparency, separating need from perception and linking to relevant user experience concepts. It seems transparency is more about practical functionality and usability than purely hedonic enjoyment. The scales also showed that individual user traits like tech savviness don't always predict transparency needs, again highlighting the context-specific nature of this construct. Theoretically, this research helps clear up a lot of confusion around the terms used in transparency research. By defining technology transparency broadly and developing these scales, they've provided a solid foundation for future studies. They've identified key aspects of transparency that are important to users and shown how transparency fits into the larger picture of user experience. For us in the real world, especially for anyone building technology, these scales are a game changer. Before you even start designing, you can use TechTra N to understand what level of transparency your users will expect and which aspects are most important. Then, as you develop your product, you can use TechTra P to test whether your designs are actually giving users that transparency. This iterative process can prevent costly mistakes and lead to truly user-centered products. The addition of qualitative questions in Study 2 makes it even more powerful, allowing users to give specific feedback. Of course, no study is perfect. The researchers acknowledged that cultural differences might influence transparency needs, and this wasn't explored in depth. More research is also needed to look at how different domains, like healthcare or finance, might require different approaches to transparency. They also suggest exploring how factors like the risk associated with the technology, or whether it is a single-purpose or multi-purpose device, could affect transparency needs. Future work could also involve more studies with actual users in real-world settings, not just labs. And imagine applying these scales to cutting-edge tech like virtual reality or augmented reality. They also noted that while they manipulated perception in Study 3, they didn't manipulate need. More research could look at how to actively influence or measure changing needs. It is an exciting space with lots more to explore. In conclusion, the TechTra Scales are a much-needed tool for anyone interested in technology transparency from a user experience perspective. They help us understand not just what people see, but what they need, and highlight that these are often two different things. This research provides a solid, validated way to assess transparency, paving the way for better, more understandable, and more trustworthy technology for all of us. It is always great to see research pushing the boundaries of what we know about how we interact with technology, and this study does just that. It is clear the researchers put a lot of thought and effort into creating these scales, and the feedback from industry professionals really validates their work. This research offers us a crucial lens to view the ever-growing complexity of technology. By listening to user needs and perceptions, we can build digital tools that empower us rather than confuse us. I hope you found this deep dive into technology transparency as fascinating as I did. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment below telling me what technology you find most or least transparent, and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns. We've got a lot more amazing research to explore together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.